Good morning, everyone. It's Lee Henson, President and Founder of AgileDad, and it's time for today's episode of the Daily Stand-Up. So without any further ado, let's get started. It's Monday. It's the start of a new week. Everything's brand new. It's like a fresh start. I love having fresh beginnings. And today, I guess we'll call it Mountain Goat Monday because I have a blog post I want to review from a dear friend of mine, Mike Cohn. So the blog post is 3 strategies for fitting refactoring into your sprints. And he starts off with a powerful quote. And the quote that he says, the best approach to technical debt is never accumulating any. But when you do, you should use some of these approaches to pay it off. And I like right out of the gate that he says the best approach is to not get it or not have any. But that begs the question, then how do you do that, right? I mean, how do you live through not having any debt? It just doesn't sound realistic, right? But as a follow-on, we've released a document called The 7 Deadly Sins of Technical Debt. We released that many years ago, and it talks about some approaches on how to identify, manage, and eventually eliminate technical debt. But I want the focus to be on this article for today. So the first thing Mike mentions is, the first approach, I should say, is to allocate a percentage of time for people to work on things each sprint. And what I can tell you from my experience is that while this is good because it's easy, it never works out. So if you've got developer Dave and developer Dave says, I work 8.8 hours a day, but I only have 5.896 hours of productive time a day. And out of that time, I dedicate this much time to updating the servers and this much. By the time developer Dave does the math, because that's the kind of geek he is, and figures out exactly what 10% of his time is or 20% of his time is that he's going to allocate this sprint to addressing debt, the time he spent will have expired and he'll have to refigure out how much time it'll take based on the remaining time left in order for him to do it. In other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is when people say they're going to dedicate a percentage of their time to do something, that very rarely happens because no one takes the time to follow through and figure out what that amount of time is. And even if they do, they never sit down and say, okay, I'm going to allocate exactly this much, percentage of my time to it. So even if you went with part 2, which is a fixed amount of time, saying we're going to do 10 hours or 5 hours, who's to say you're not going to get 5 hours into something and discover that that's right at the peak of where you're about to find out the answer and you say, my 5 hours are up, I'm done, bam, shut it down. And then you have to completely re-engage and refigure to get back to where you were next time. You could have been on the cusp of solving the problem, but now not so much. Or vice versa. You could dump 20 hours into it when you only needed to dump 3. And I've seen that go both ways. So I think that anytime you're saying it's a fixed amount of time, that's sort of painful, right? And I just feel like you need to be careful when you're saying a fixed amount of time because sometimes the allotment is too much, sometimes the allotment is too little. I think you need to find a different way. So the second approach is to use a fixed number of story points. Now this is better because then you can say, okay, this means that all inbound things that we need to address that are associated with debt are going to have a point value, and it'll be a story labeled technical debt. And we can burn down so many points per sprint. This is a smart approach. This is going to give you the ability to stay focused, but still have a dedicated amount of time. The problem here, though, is that most product owners aren't going to let you burn off too many story points on technical debt. So the best way for me to explain this is it's like having a credit card bill that's $280,000 and having a product owner say, well, I guess I can allow you to pay $20 a month. It's the minimum monthly payment fallacy, right? That what's going to happen is if you pay that little bit a month, that at some point you'll be out of debt, which isn't the case. At some point, the interest will exceed the debt or exceed the payment, and the amount of debt actually increases. So I think it's just important for you to realize that it's hard. And people are probably asking, well, if neither of those things work, what does work, right? Because most organizations are doing those very things that we just now described. And I think that if you're smart about your capacity, I'm sure you could figure it out. Or if you're smart about adjusting points and put enough points in, I also think you can figure it out. But I have an even more ideal, more fun way to do this. And I think, the first thing you have to figure out is how much debt you actually have, right? So you need to figure out how much debt you have, lay it out in a technical debt backlog, and then say to yourself, and technical debt doesn't always just mean defects, right? We need to lay out all of our debt in a backlog and ask ourselves, when will this be repaid? If we continue business as usual, will this ever be repaid, right? And the answer, of course, is going to be no. So then the question becomes, what do we need to do in order to take care of that debt? And I think that the best approach that I found so far is allocating a technical debt sprint once per quarter, once every 6 months, whatever's appropriate as far as the heartbeat cadence is concerned, based on the amount of debt you have. But the second piece of this is identify how you handle new debt that's inbound. So usually when debt comes in, I think that there are three categories. Category one is, we got to drop everything and fix this right now. Category two is this is incredibly important and we have it teed up as the first item in our next sprint, but I don't want to interrupt forward progress. So it just takes the place of an item in a sprint, which is totally acceptable. And then number three is my favorite. It's called KBNR, known but not resolved. This means that this is important, but not necessarily something that's having a huge impact. So we're going to mark it as known but not resolved. We're going to put it into a separate backlog. And when we build our new system or when we do our new upgrade, we're going to make sure that we take that list and pick off the ones that are going to be the most important. That way, we're not interrupting forward progress with what we're building with taking on those debt items. Now, if we find that those debt items are squeaky wheel or they really are hindering someone's ability to do something, obviously we need to find a way to get those into a sprint. But what I found is by taking this approach, it allows the team to say, I have an allocated period that I'm asked to work on this debt stuff. And then for the rest of the time, I can work on the things that are critical to get a new product or service out to market. It increases and improves quality. It increases and improves morale. It helps people feel like they're not, going to get run over by a train at the end of the tunnel. And it lets people focus on the bigger picture so that they could see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and it's not a train coming from the other direction to hit them, and that they can actually get over debt, that they can get through it, and that everything's going to be fine. I think the goal is to get the team to the point where they're confident and comfortable starting off with a clean slate so that they can know that what they're building makes a difference. I hope this was useful to you. I hope this helped. And thank you, Mike, for publishing that article. It's an awesome article on technical debt. If you want to look at that, it's on mountaingoatsoftware.com. It's a great article. And he gives you some real good tips about debt, and as always, we agree. It just seems like Mike and I are on the same page a lot. I ask and invite you, if you have questions about this topic or any other topic, you can visit the AgileDad website where we also have information about these things, and we'd love to provide it for you for free. And if you have an idea, something that you want to hear us talk about here on the Daily Stand-Up Podcast, feel free to email us at learnmore@agiledad.com, where we'd love to hear more about what you want to talk about, and we'd love to give it a shot and see what we can put together. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.